Welcome to today's digital representation of cash. Um, let's see here. Well, cash is, I would like to say, the most stoic of all of the As I Lay Dying characters. He feels, he can feel kind of rigid, but he does provide a better sense of what type of a person he is from his actions more than from his words. Um, we could look at a couple of quotes here. A good carpenter caches. Now this is in the same area, or this is the same point at which he is working on the coffin for Addie. Um, we can see here that most of his early dialogue consist of mainly him working on the coffin, and that's part of who he is as a character for the first half of the book. We can see here, the Lord giveth, he says. We can hear Kasha hammering and sawing beyond the corner. This is also talking about how Cash is working on the coffin. But earlier, when Anne says, the Lord giveth, I believe that sort of alludes to Cash representing a sort of Christ archetype, or like a savior archetype at least. Because obviously we can see the correlation between Cash and Jesus both having an occupation as a carpenter. However, in this case, Cash is working very, very closely with death, in that he's making this coffin for his dying mother. While Jesus also has a lot of stuff to do with death, it's more about the resurrection afterwards, which differentiates Jesus from Cash. Cash himself doesn't necessarily die. It's more like he's attempting to use his actions to redeem the past grievances of his family. So we can move on to the next bookmark here. Okay, so we're still at the point where he's talking about taking care of the coffin and basing most of his actions and thoughts around the coffin. He goes again. He moves again and falls to shifting the planks, picking them up, laying them down again carefully, as though they are glass. He obviously cares about his work. Cash is very deeply engrossed in completing this coffin for Addie. And we can see, even though he doesn't really exchange words very often with any other characters of the story, we see from the several different perspectives that almost everyone in the story considers Cash to be very, 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 very invested into completing this coffin the best way he knows how. He even goes on a tangent later to discuss how, in his chapter here, it goes so far as to base almost all of his thoughts on creating this coffin. However, after number 3, or after step 3, I believe the step form relates to his like rigidness of thought. Rigidness of thought in that he's a working hand man, so he understands things through actions rather than words. Something that Addie alludes to inside her dialogue. But here, at around number 4, it starts bringing in social commentary that relates to his family. And it goes down. This particular section always stood out to me because everything he says makes logical sense. However, when he alludes it to an external apparatus that is not purely physical, um, it comes very naturally. Like here, he's talking this whole time. I'm not sure if this is. I'm pretty sure this is internal dialogue because there's no quotation, not quotation marks. This quotation marks or those things that indicate dialogue. Um, he's very straightforward in his speech. Uh, however, he mixes this straightforwardness with that underlying tone of trying to figure out how his family works, what he can do to carry out the task that he's been practically designed to do. He's more of like a workhorse that kind of questions his own existence rather than someone who questions their own existence just doing work mediously or meaninglessly. He ends it off on "It makes a neater job." We see this constant need to do the job right by Cash, over and over and over again. The story pounded down into the reader's head that all Cash is making this coffin a very, very neat work of art. Um, it alludes to him being a jeweler, or not. It doesn't allude, but it talks. It describes him like or slash as a jeweler. I couldn't find the exact quote that says that, but somewhere in there, definitely know it's somewhere in there. We're gonna move on to next one. Okay, so we see here at this point in the story, the coffin's already done. They're transporting the coffin, and Cash he's feeling stressed, or he's feeling a little peeved because they're on this long trip and things are just not turning out right. There's tragedy, sort of disaster mixed in. However, at this point, we can still see the power dynamic between the siblings and Anne's. Cash says, "Shut up, Jewel." Obviously, because Jewel's younger than him. Jewel listens, and Cash says after a while, "What do you want? What you want to do?" He's bringing the authority of speaking back to Anne's. We see how Anne's is overexerted control over his children is exemplified in this particular case, where where Cash will most likely turn to Anne's in the face of hardship. Although the reader knows that that's probably not the best idea. But it's just the way Cash was raised. We move on to Sasquatch. So this is within Addie's chapter where she's talking about her experiences in life and her preparation for death. Here she seems quite transparent that she's mostly apathetic or uncaring for her spouse and her children at one point. She even goes so far as to say that Cash coming into her life was a violation of her privacy. Kind of harsh words coming from a mother. So she considers Cash someone who exists merely to disrupt her presence of mind, sort of. She doesn't express any real affection for Cash, nor does she for most of her children. She does express a little bit of affection for Jewel, but that's more. I feel like that's more arise, or that comes more from her interaction with the minister Whitfield than anything. Um, she talks about Cash as if he was a burden. Like, I would think that if he were to wake and cry, I would suckle him too. Like, he's merely just another mouth to feed, rather than something to give affection or care about. Of course, she talks about how she's playing her part, and she's not going out of her way to like necessarily hate her children, but you can see here that she doesn't care very much for Cash. Feels kind of bad for Cash, even though Cash tries so hard to please the people around him. Okay. We also see the stoic nature of Cash in that he talks about his own pain and suffering as merely a minor tribulation. Not even. It's like a minor inconvenience, which I find extremely comedic. I don't know if that applies to anyone else that's read the story, but I just find it very, very funny. Um, Cash is obviously very, very kind. He he cares more about the pain and suffering of others than he does about his own. In this scene, he's talking about how his leg is in a cast now, or like a cast made out of cement, which I don't recommend anyone doing because that's just not medically that's not medically beneficial. But anyways, um, he considers it like just a minor thing. Like it doesn't like internally he knows that it's a bad thing that his leg is broken. However, externally, he says that his leg is fine and everything like that simply because he knows that his family doesn't have the expense to pay for any potential medical problems that he has. He tries to please Anne's in that he knows that Anne's probably won't get medical help even if they could anyways, simply because Anne's wants to save money because Anne's is a snake. But for the most part, he stays very stoic, and he just puts puts a greater value on the lives of others around him than he does his own, which I find so very respectable. Here we see like a glimpse into his inner nature around pleasures. So while we see most of the rest of the family, like Dewey or Anne's or even Addie in her flashback, um, giving into sensual pleasures or desires of the flesh and things like that, um, we see here the satisfaction Cash gets from completing a task is far more consequential than the satisfaction he gains from basic human pleasures. We see here that he considers music, even though it may be soothing or pleasure giving to most people, he considers it to be a distraction to his work. His work is part of who he is. It comprises his whole understanding of the physical world around him, and it even comprises a large part of the mental world around him. He relates to Addie in that the only way he knows how to care for Addie uh, majorly is by constructing something physical for her to have, namely her coffin. Um, he works all in absolutes of the physical, and any manifestation of desire past the physical point he sees as a distraction to his work, which is the culmination of his being. So without his work, he would be nothing more than a baser human. And we see from most of his internal dialogue that that is not his um, desire. His desire is mainly to complete his work and make it the best he can, which I find to be quite both a respectable yet sad way of living. I feel like Cash is sort of a tragic hero. Now, if we move over here past the elephant shrew, we can get over to my very, very crude drawings of particular scenes. We see here that Cash would much rather prefer being a carpenter than he would a farmer. Hence the hammer being held over the sickle. That's not an allusion to any particular political ideology. That's just how the picture ended up. We see here Cash admiring his handiwork on the coffin. That whole scene to me was so comedic in nature. To me, I'm not sure if that seemed gruesome to anyone else, but that was just so funny. Because he's talking about all the logical reasons as to why he made the coffin the way he did. He talks about the particular seams of the coffin going in one particular direction. He goes into talking about the bevel or whatever that is a lot. I'm assuming it has something to do with the orientation of the bottom layer of the coffin. And most of the story that has Cash in it involves him and his physical manifestation of his care and his love for the people around him manifested inside the workings of the coffin. And we can move on. So he's extremely stoic. Even though I have a feeling that even if his arm was torn off by a bear, for example, a bear that looks like, I don't know, like this. Very, very crude drawing here. But a very scary bear with bloody teeth, bloody claws. I'm sure that even if he got his arm torn off by a bear like that, he would still consider it as something of lesser value than if, for example, Dewey got like a nosebleed or something. He's just such a stoic character, and that lends to a sense of naivety, but also to a sense of how much he cares for his family. And even though he knows ants is inherently less than ant feces, ants over here, whose whole archetype can be summed up in the sentence, "I'm so unlucky, boo-hoo," while he's over here soaking up the riches of his family, Cash still cares for Ans, even though he knows how much of a bad person Ans is. Cash is just like so such a nice person. I don't know. Here, he's sort of like a workhorse. I don't know why the workhorse has a human face, but it just does. Just roll with it. Good as new. This is probably one of the most striking scenes for me, because this is at the point where his leg is literally broken and he decides to use a cement cast instead of seeking medical help. Like, this man is so hard. Like, oh my gosh. When you think of stoic, or like a bastion of of virtue, this is who you think of right here. Like, Cash is literally the culmination of almost everything good it is to be human. And his family does not regard him in as high of a light as they need to. This man is the beacon for humanity. Anyways, moving on here. This is the song that that most sums up Cash for me. I'm not gonna play it here because I think that would be a waste of time. However, just to know that this song talks about this stranger coming in. I don't know a lot of country songs, so this is just what popped up in my head. But it talks about this stranger that came into a town and finished business. And by finished business, I mean he apprehended an outlaw who was considered to be the biggest, the baddest in that part of the West. This stranger apprehended the outlaw. He did his task and wasn't like boisterous. He didn't brag. He was humble, unlike the outlaw. And this song just sums up how Cash completes his task in a timely manner, efficiently, and he doesn't like to. He's a man of few words. I'll say that. Much like the stranger inside the song. He. There's not much more I can say about him that hasn't already been said. Of course, Cash does have his downfalls in that he might be a little bit too kind for his own good, as in he might put the values of other people above his own too much. However, that's not really too bad of a downfall, I would say. Actually, Cash is just one of my favorite characters from the book in general. Think that's it. Yep. That's my analysis and visual representation of Cash. So, have a good break, I suppose. I miss school, so never thought I'd say that, but it's been an awfully wild time. Okay, well, that's it.